The camera lies. It has always lied, not maliciously, with purpose, with craft, with the specific professional deception that turns a quarry on the outskirts of a Virginia college town into the scarred red hills of Mars, or a mountain lodge in rural Appalachia into a Catskills resort in 1963, or a state park in Utah into the lip of the Grand Canyon. What the audience sees is the fiction. What the location scouts, the production designers, and the camera operators actually found is something else entirely. A real place that had the right light, the right bones, the right kind of silence. These are 15 American locations where that sleight of hand was performed at its most audacious. The film said one thing. The actual address said another. And in the gap between those two facts lives something genuinely interesting about how movies are made, how landscapes are read, and why a sandstone canyon in southeastern Utah can convince the whole world it is looking at Arizona. These places are still there. The light is still the same. What has changed is that you now know what you're looking at. The film told you it was Greenbow, Alabama, the bench where Forrest Gump sat and told his life story to strangers at a bus stop, the bench where he delivered the line about life and boxes of chocolates, the bench where he began every flashback across 2 hours of American history. That bench stood on the north side of Chippewa Square in Savannah, Georgia, a city that never appears by name in the film and is never implied to be where any of this is happening. Director Robert Zemeckis chose Savannah in 1993 because its moss-draped public squares, antebellum architecture, and particular quality of southern light created a version of the American South that was idealized without being false. A backdrop capacious enough to contain 50 years of invented national memory. Chippewa Square, established in 1815 to honor the Battle of Chippewa during the War of 1812, centers on a bronze statue of General James Oglethorpe, the founder of the Georgia colony. The bench itself was a movie prop. A fiberglass fabrication placed on the north edge of the square specifically for the production, positioned so that the steeple of the Independent Presbyterian Church would appear behind it in certain frames. It was never a permanent fixture, never a real bus stop. The production used at least 4 separate bench props during filming. When shooting concluded, one bench was donated to the Savannah History Museum at 303 Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, where it remains under climate control and behind a rope barrier, the most visited artifact in a museum that also contains a Civil War locomotive and a cotton gin. Chippewa Square today is a small, beautiful public park with benches of its own. Just not that bench. Visitors who arrive expecting to sit where Tom Hanks sat find instead a garden bed with a small sign. The flowers change by season. The Independent Presbyterian Church steeple rises behind them, exactly as it does in the opening frames of the film. The Overlook Hotel of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is set in the Colorado Rockies, based on Stephen King's Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, and its interior was built on sound stages at Elstree Studios in Hertfordshire, England, where the maze, the corridors, the Gold Room Bar, and Room 237 were constructed from scratch on a production that lasted nearly a year. None of this happened in Oregon, and yet the face of the Overlook Hotel, the establishing shots that open the film, the exterior that Jack Nicholson walks through, the building that an audience watches with mounting dread as it disappears into the first winter snowfall, is the Timberline Lodge, built by the Federal Works Progress Administration between 1936 and 1938 on the south slope of Mount Hood at an elevation of 5,960 feet, 45 miles east of Portland. Kubrick's production chose Timberline because its WPA-era architecture, with its hand-hewn timber, native stonework, and deliberately imposing mass, carried exactly the institutional weight that the story required. A building that felt like it had been there since before anyone alive could remember, and that intended to remain long after everyone inside it was gone. The lodge made one request of Kubrick's team: change the room number. In King's novel, the haunted room is room 217, a real room at the Timberline. The hotel asked that it be changed for the film, concerned that future guests would refuse to book it. Kubrick changed it to the non-existent Room 237. The consequence: Room 217 at Timberline Lodge is now the most requested room in the building, booked months in advance by guests who want to sleep in the room that was too frightening for a horror movie to use. The Lodge, a National Historic Landmark since 1977, draws nearly 2 million visitors per year. It operates year-round as a ski resort. The exterior is unchanged. The mountains behind it are the same mountains. The snow, on a winter morning, falls in exactly the way Kubrick filmed it falling. Kellerman's Mountain House, the fictional resort in the Catskill Mountains of New York, where Baby Houseman meets Johnny Castle in the summer of 1963, is a real place. It is not in the Catskills. It is not in New York. It is Mountain Lake Lodge, a stone resort built in 1936 on a 2,600-acre property in Pembroke, Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains at an elevation of 3,875 feet, roughly 30 miles west of Blacksburg and a considerable distance from anything resembling the upstate New York of the film's setting. The production chose Mountain Lake Lodge in 1986 because its rustic stone main building, its cabins scattered among the trees, its natural lake, and its surrounding mountain terrain created exactly the look of a certain kind of mid-century American resort. The kind of place Jewish families from New York City drove to every summer, without requiring the production to actually go to the Catskills, where similar resorts had by 1986 largely closed or declined. The film knits Mountain Lake Lodge together with a second location, an old summer camp at Lake Lure in North Carolina, for its staff quarters and ballroom scenes. But the heart of Kellerman's, the main building, the waterfront gazebo, the lawn where the guests play shuffleboard, and the staff practice their dances at night. That is Pembroke, Virginia. There is a complication with the lake. Mountain Lakes sits in a geologically unusual basin that causes its water level to fluctuate dramatically, and since the 1980s, it has periodically drained to near emptiness. The same lake where Baby and Johnny practiced their lift in the water is, sometimes, for years at a time, not a lake at all but a dry bed. The lodge operates today as a full resort and has fully embraced its cinematic history, offering themed Dirty Dancing weekends that include self-guided tour maps marking every filming location on the property, dance instruction, and a schedule that has been running since the film's release, made Mountain Lake Lodge one of the most recognizable properties in the state of Virginia that nobody in the state of Virginia knew existed. The Grand Canyon does not appear in Thelma and Louise, the canyon that Thelma and Louise drive into at the end of Ridley Scott's 1991 film. The lip they pause at, the gorge that opens beneath them as their car goes over the edge, and the freeze frame holds for a moment that became one of the most discussed endings in American cinema, is Fossil Point, visible from Dead Horse Point State Park outside Moab, Utah. The canyon below is the Colorado River, cutting through the canyon country of southeastern Utah. The rock is sandstone. The color is the specific burnt orange that canyon country has, and that Arizona actually has, too, which is part of why the substitution works. Audiences were not wrong about the geology, only about the geography. Scott and his crew could not film at the actual Grand Canyon. The National Park Service has strict permitting requirements and aesthetic restrictions on productions that use its land. And the canyon country around Moab provided something in certain respects more dramatically useful than the Grand Canyon itself. A rim where you could place a camera, a gorge that fell away below it, and the particular quality of Utah desert light in the late afternoon. Dead Horse Point State Park, named for a local legend about horses that were corralled on the peninsula above the canyon and left to die of thirst within sight of the river below, offers what Scott found from its west rim overlook, a view of the Colorado River that reads, to an audience primed by context, as exactly the kind of ending the film demands. The park charges a $20 entry fee per vehicle. The lookout point where Thelma and Louise is most visible from above has been informally named Thelma and Louise Point, on most mapping applications. The canyon below remains unchanged. The Colorado River runs through it. The drop is exactly as far as it looks. The Silence of the Lambs is set in Baltimore, Maryland, where Hannibal Lecter's hospital is, and in various locations across Ohio, West Virginia, and Tennessee, where Buffalo Bill is hiding with his victims. It was filmed almost entirely in and around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Jonathan Demme chose Western Pennsylvania in 1989 for practical reasons of availability and incentive, but the result is one of the great location disguise achievements in American film. Pittsburgh, a city with a specific and recognizable civic identity, becomes completely invisible behind the institutional buildings, industrial edges, and rural byways that Demme pressed into service as other places. The exterior of the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where Clarice Starling descends through locked gate after locked gate to meet Hannibal Lecter, is the administration building of the Western Center in Canonsburg, an abandoned mental hospital on Interstate 79, roughly 15 miles south of Pittsburgh. It has since been demolished. The Memphis Town Hall, where Lecter escapes from his cage and borrows the face of his guard, is the Allegheny County Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall at 4141 Fifth Avenue in Pittsburgh, a military museum that is now part of the University of Pittsburgh. The house where the film climaxes, the home of Buffalo Bill, which the film sets in Belvidere, Ohio, is a Princess Anne-style house built in 1910 in Perryopolis, Fayette County, Pennsylvania, on the banks of the Youghiogheny River. It was purchased in 2020 by a film industry art director who converted it into a vacation rental and tour destination. The front porch where Clarice knocks and Buffalo Bill answers is the same front porch. The basement where the pit was dug is the same basement. Anthony Hopkins drove across the country from Utah to Pittsburgh for the shoot, stopping at motels along the way. He later said that by the time he reached Pittsburgh, Hannibal Lecter was ready to start work. The dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are computer-generated and animatronic. The island of Isla Nublar, where John Hammond's park is located, does not exist. The jungle, the waterfalls, the helicopter approach across razor-edged cliffs, dropping into a valley of impossible green. Those are real, and they are in Hawaii. Steven Spielberg filmed the 1993 film primarily on the island of Kauai, the smallest and westernmost of Hawaii's 4 main islands, a place whose geological age and particular density of vegetation created a landscape that had no peer among available locations for conveying both prehistoric scale and tropical menace. The Na Pali coast of Kauai's North Shore, 16 miles of cathedral sea cliffs rising 4,000 feet from the Pacific, accessible only by boat, helicopter, or an 11-mile hiking trail, serves as the face of Isla Nublar in the film's establishing aerial shots. Manawaiopuna Falls, a 400-foot waterfall in the interior of Kauai, accessible only by helicopter, is the waterfall the visitors see from their helicopter as they first approach the park. Now so thoroughly identified with the film that tour, operators call it Jurassic Falls and sell helicopter tours specifically to reach it. The Allerton Garden in Poipu, part of the National Tropical Botanical Garden, supplied the massive Morton Bay fig tree roots visible in the scene where the velociraptor stalks the children through the jungle. Kauai provided the paradise. Universal Studios in North Hollywood provided the sound stages for the interiors. Hurricane Iniki, one of the most powerful hurricanes in Hawaiian history, made landfall on Kauai on September 11, 1992, midway through principal photography, and flattened several of the production sets. Spielberg kept his cast and crew in a hotel ballroom while the storm passed, then resumed shooting in the wreckage. The Na Pali coast is unchanged. The falls are unchanged. The only things that have changed are the helicopters, which now create tourists specifically because of the film. Almost every scene in Forrest Gump that is not set in Chippewa Square in Savannah, the Gump family home, young Forrest's school, the plantation where Jenny grows up, the football field, the town Main Street, was filmed not in Alabama, not in Georgia, but in and around Beaufort, South Carolina, a small coastal city on Port Royal Sound that was in the early 1990s quietly establishing itself as one of the most reliable film production locations in the American South. The family's white columned house, where Forrest grows up with his mother, and where she tells him about life being like a box of chocolates before the bench version of that line, is the Bluff Plantation House on Twickenham Road in Beaufort, a private property on the banks of a tidal river, visible through iron gates by visitors who make the drive out from the city center. The fictional town of Greenbow, Alabama, where the young Gump walks to school with braces on his legs and where Forrest is told his IQ is below enrollment standards, was Varnville, South Carolina, a small town on Route 68 about 35 miles northwest of Beaufort, where many of the main street storefronts were dressed by the production, and subsequently kept their movie set appearance for years afterward. Hampton Street Elementary School in Walterboro, where the principal shows Mrs. Gump the diagram explaining Forrest's intelligence, is now the Colleton Center at 494 Hampton Street. The field where the young Forrest first runs is in Beaufort County. The water where he learns to play ping pong is near Beaufort. South Carolina, playing Alabama, playing the entire emotional heartland of an invented American life, is one of the quieter achievements in the film's production history. Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas is set in the world of the Lucchese's crime family, which operated primarily out of East New York, Brooklyn, and the neighborhoods around John F. Kennedy Airport in Queens. The film was shot on real locations across New York City and does not disguise itself as being anywhere other than New York. What it does do, consistently, carefully, and with the same commitment to misdirection that its characters bring to their own daily operations, is use one New York location to play another. The Bamboo Lounge, where Henry Hill's narration introduces the neighborhood's criminal cast, and where Tommy DeVito delivers the most famous funny how monologue in American crime cinema, was actually the Hawaii Kai restaurant at 1638 Broadway between 49th and 50th Streets in Midtown Manhattan, a Polynesian-themed supper club that had operated at that address since the 1960s. The real Bamboo Lounge, the actual bar that Henry Hill frequented in Canarsie, Brooklyn, has been a Nissan dealership for decades. The diner where the grown-up Hill and Tommy steal a truck outside JFK is the Jackson Hole Diner at 6935 Astoria Boulevard in Astoria Heights, Queens, where the famous pink and chrome interior and the old airline neon sign from the building's previous incarnation are still intact and still serving burgers. The Copacabana sequence, the 4-minute continuous Steadicam shot in which Henry takes Karen through the kitchen entrance of the Copa and through the entire backstage of the club to a table that appears at the front of the room, was filmed at the actual Copacabana at 10 East 60th Street in Manhattan, now a nightclub of a different kind in the same space. Scorsese grew up in Little Italy and knew the geography of this world from childhood. The film's New York is simultaneously completely real and completely rearranged. Shaw State Penitentiary, the fictional Maine prison where Andy Dufresne spends 19 years for a murder he did not commit, is the Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio, a Victorian Gothic correctional facility built between 1886 and 1910 at 100 Reformatory Road on the northern edge of the city. The building, designed by Cleveland architect Levi T. Schofield, and constructed in a style that combined Romanesque Revival, Gothic, and Victorian Chateau-esque elements into something that looks like it was designed specifically for a film about institutional despair, was actually a functioning prison from 1896 until 1990, when a federal court order citing inhumane conditions forced its closure. Frank Darabont's production arrived 4 years later and found a building that had been vacant long enough to develop the specific texture of institutional decay that the story required but still retained all of its original architectural grandeur. 6 stories of cell blocks rising from a central corridor a warden's office with a view of the entire yard, stone walls that had been holding people inside them for nearly a century. The exterior wall, the gate, the yard, the iconic shot of Andy Dufresne standing with his arms out in the rain after crawling through 500 yards of sewage pipe. All of that is Mansfield, Ohio, which is roughly halfway between Columbus and Cleveland and otherwise not on any cinematic itinerary. The Ohio State Reformatory has been open for tours since the early 1990s and is now managed by the Mansfield Reformatory Preservation Society, which offers daily tours, overnight ghost hunts, escape room experiences, and a Shawshank trail that maps every significant filming location on the property. Approximately 100,000 visitors arrive each year. They come for a film about a prison in Maine to stand inside a prison in Ohio. Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, set during the final weeks of the Civil War in Washington, D.C. in 1865, in the U.S. Capitol building, in the House of Representatives chamber, in the Executive Mansion, was filmed almost entirely in Richmond, Virginia. The choice is significant. Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy during the war that Lincoln's film depicts, which means that the arguments for the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery were reenacted on film inside the political architecture of the government that fought to preserve it. The Virginia State Capitol, designed by Thomas Jefferson with Charles Louis Clerisot and completed in 1788, stood in for the U.S. Capitol in all the film's legislative scenes. Jefferson's design placed the old House of Representatives chamber in a rotunda, and that rotunda, where Virginia's legislature had actually deliberated, where Confederate officials had governed, where Abraham Lincoln had visited after the fall of Richmond in April 1865, became the chamber where Daniel Day-Lewis's Lincoln watches the vote on the amendment in the film's climactic sequence. The Virginia Executive Mansion on Capitol Square, the official residence of the Governor of Virginia and the oldest governor's residence in continuous use in the United States, provided the White House domestic interiors. Maymont Park, a Victorian estate in Richmond, served for the Lincoln family's carriage rides and for the reenactment of Lee's surrender at Appomattox. Spielberg's Lincoln never goes to Washington. It goes to Virginia, which is a fact the film does not mention, and which most of its audience does not know, and which, if you understand the history involved, gives every scene a layer of irony that the production may or may not have fully intended. Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation of S.E. Hinton's 1967 novel The Outsiders is set in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1965, and it was filmed in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1982, which makes it unusual on this list, but no less interesting for that. Hinton wrote the novel as a teenager in Tulsa and set it in the North Side neighborhood she knew. And the film's Tulsa is a genuine Tulsa. The streets, the drive-ins, the specific texture of a mid-century American city, divided by geography and class into East Side and West Side. Sock and Greaser. The Curtis brothers' house, where Ponyboy, Derry, and Soda Pop live, is at 731 North St. Louis Avenue in the Crutchfield neighborhood of North Tulsa. A real house on a real street that in 1982 looked exactly like the house in Hinton's imagination and that today operates as the Outsiders House Museum, a privately maintained cultural site open to visitors that has undergone restoration to return it to its 1960s appearance. Hinton lived nearby when she wrote the book. Coppola brought a cast that included Tom Cruise, Matt Dillon, Patrick Swayze, Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, and a very young Ralph Macchio to Tulsa for the shoot and housed them together with the intention of reproducing the social divisions of the story. Greasers in one house, Socks in another, the two groups developing genuine antagonism during production. The drive-in where the Greasers and Socks fight is in Tulsa. The park where Johnny kills Bob is in Tulsa. The church where Ponyboy and Johnny hide after the killing is the Skiatook Church of Christ, about 20 miles north of the city. The Outsiders House Museum at 731 North St. Louis Avenue is open for tours. The staircase, the kitchen, the front porch, all preserved. The neighborhood around it is North Tulsa, which is still North Tulsa. Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused, set on the last day of school and the first night of summer in a fictional Texas town in 1976, was filmed almost entirely in Austin, Texas, in 1992, which means it was filmed in the same state it is set in, but not in the same town, and not in a town that looks very much like the working-class suburb of Houston that the characters are supposed to inhabit. Linklater grew up in Huntsville, Texas, and based the film's social world on his own adolescence. But he shot in Austin because that was where he was based, and because the specific buildings and streets he needed. The Emporium Pool Hall, the Sonic Drive-In, the Topwater Park, existed in Austin in forms that worked for the period. The Emporium, where Wooderson delivers his famous lines about high school girls, and where the last night of school gathering happens, is a real building that operated as a pool hall at the time and has since become various other things. The Randall's Supermarket parking lot, where the freshmen are hazed before the game, is a real parking lot in North Austin. The Moonlight Towers, the 165-foot carbon arc lights erected in Austin in 1895, 17 of which still stand and are still operational, making Austin the only city in the United States to retain them, appear throughout the film and are the single-source identifiable visual element, connecting the film to its actual location. The tower at Shipe Park at 45th Street and Avenue G appears most prominently. Austin designated the Moonlight Towers a historic landmark in 1970. They are on the National Register of Historic Places. They are still lit. They still look exactly like they look in the film, because they have looked exactly like that since 1895. The baseball diamond in the cornfield in Field of Dreams, where the ghost of shoeless Joe Jackson and the 1919 Black Sox emerge from the corn at twilight, is a real field on a real farm in Dyersville, Iowa, a town of approximately 4,000 people in Dubuque County in the northeastern corner of the state. The field was built in 1988 on the farmland of Don Lansing at 28995 Lansing Road for the production, with the farmhouse already on the property serving as the Kinsella family home. The film was released in April 1989. By that summer, without any formal organization, fans began arriving at the farm to see the field. No studio promotion, no tourist infrastructure. Just people who had seen a film about a man who built a baseball diamond in an Iowa cornfield and driven to Iowa to see the baseball diamond in the Iowa cornfield. Within a year, the Lansing farm was receiving tens of thousands of visitors annually. The field remained a working farm. The corn was planted and harvested on its regular agricultural schedule, and the baseball diamond was maintained at the far end of the property where it had been built for the film. In 2011, the property was sold, splitting ownership in two families who had different ideas about how to manage the tourism, and a second diamond was built adjacent to the first. Both are now open to the public and free to visit. In 2021, Major League Baseball brought the Chicago White Sox and the New York Yankees to Dyersville to play a regular season game at a stadium built adjacent to the original field, walking the teams out through the corn to reach the field, recreating exactly the image from the film. The corn is still planted every spring. The field is still there. People still arrive without appointments and find it. In addition to the fake Grand Canyon at Dead Horse Point, the flat desert of New Mexico through which Thelma and Louise drive during the film's middle section, the sun-baked, wide, open, horizontally infinite landscape that suggests they are headed south and west toward the border, is the spectacular red sandstone country of southeastern Utah, specifically the area around Arches National Park, the La Salle Mountains along Route 46 southeast of Moab, and the small desert crossroads at La Salle Junction. This is a more audacious deception than the Grand Canyon substitution, because New Mexico's landscape is broadly flat, and Utah's canyon country is dramatically vertical, but Ridley Scott and cinematographer Adrian Biddle found the angles, the time of day, and the color temperature that made sandstone mesas read as desert plain, and audiences who had never been to either place accepted it without question. The La Salle Mountains, rising over 12,000 feet above the canyon country, appear as a distant backdrop in several of the road scenes and represent a geological formation that does not exist anywhere near the route the film claims its characters are driving. The town of Cisco, Utah, a near ghost town on Interstate 70 between Green River and Grand Junction, served as the location for the police chase sequence. Arch National Park, 15 miles north of Moab, provided the formations visible in the background of the convertible sequences. All of these locations can be visited by anyone willing to drive southeast from Salt Lake City. The landscape looks exactly as it does in the film. It has looked exactly this way for approximately 65 million years. The Gotham City of Todd Phillips's Joker, the decaying, garbage-strike, crippled, economically devastated American city that turns Arthur Fleck into a murderer in 1981, is not New York City, where the film is set, but Newark, New Jersey, filmed primarily during a production that ran through the fall of 2018 in a city that still bears genuine physical evidence of the urban decline the film is trying to depict. The most iconic image in the film, Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck dancing down the long concrete stairs, connecting Shakespeare Avenue to Anderson Avenue in the Highbridge neighborhood, is not in Gotham and not in New York. It is at the intersection of West 167th Street and Shakespeare Avenue in the Highbridge neighborhood of the Bronx, New York City, a working residential neighborhood of brick apartment buildings and bodega storefronts, where the stairs descend a steep hillside between two streets. The stairs became famous overnight upon the film's release, generating so many visitors within the first weeks that local residents complained about the disruption, and the Bronx tourism infrastructure found itself promoting an attraction that the neighborhood had not asked for and did not entirely want. What the Newark locations provided, and what the Bronx stairs provided, was a city that still looked, in certain specific blocks and certain specific angles, like the early 1980s New York that the film needed but that Manhattan proper no longer offers. The peeling brick, the narrow fire escapes, the streets that felt like they were about to lose their footing. The stairs are at the corner of West 167th Street and Shakespeare Avenue in the Bronx. They are a regular residential staircase. People live in the buildings on both sides. They watch people come to dance on the stairs every weekend, and some of them find this funny, and some of them do not.